Bowser's Inside Story was more than just a successful game for Alphadream. It was the title they needed to turn the Mario and Luigi franchise from just another Mario spin-off into a full-blown hit. And it was a pretty massive one. It easily became the highest-selling Mario RPG of all time, traditional RPG at least, selling a relatively enormous 4.5 million units, and its success was, in my opinion, very well deserved. But the real test was whether or not they were going to be able to turn that success into momentum to continue driving the series forward, which after a game like Bowser's Inside Story would not be an easy task, especially when once again having to do a generational leap from the DS to its beefier, feature-packed successor, the 3DS. But that didn't stop Alphadream from trying, and this fourth game was actually going to be a bit of a team effort. See, while 2013 was the Mario and Luigi franchise's 10th anniversary, it was also, more importantly for Nintendo, Luigi's 30th anniversary, and to celebrate, they dubbed it the Year of Luigi. There were a lot of fun little events throughout the year, tons of Luigi merch, a fun Luigi commercial, some special 3DS consoles, several Miiverse communities, and of course there were a few Luigified games. And as a genuine Luigi stan, I've always chosen him in Mario Party. He was my main in Mario Kart 8, and I have, in fact, accidentally chosen him in Smash Bros as well. I was pretty stoked for the whole shebang. So when Luigi's Mansion Dark Moon came out, I didn't buy it, since I hadn't even played the first one yet. Then, when New Super Luigi U came out, I also didn't buy it, because I didn't really like New Super Mario Bros. U much in the first place. But there was one game that I did buy during the Year of Luigi that was actually on topic, and no, it was not Dr. Luigi, it was, in fact, the fourth game in the Mario & Luigi series, Mario & Luigi Dream Team. Now, this was first announced by Satoru Iwata himself during a Nintendo Direct in February 2013, and honestly, I don't think it really did a good job of making a first impression. As someone who hadn't played these games, it looked pretty dull in that first trailer, but thankfully later trailers did a much better job of making the game look more fun, so thanks to those trailers, along with the hype from the Year of Luigi, I decided a few days before release to contribute to the cause, and I bought it on day one. As I'd said at the beginning of this series, I'd never played any of the Mario & Luigi games prior to trying Dream Team, and with how much praise was levied at the previous entries, I feel like I may have put too many expectations on this particular game's shoulders. I don't remember exactly what caused me to put it down, but after I bought it, I played for about 4 hours over the next 2 days, and then that was it for the next decade. But thanks to that, I've been able to see a lot of the discourse around this game secondhand, and that's been pretty interesting. It got decent reviews, albeit the lowest in the series to this point, but it's the fan reaction that stuck out a lot more. It seems like this is a game that, for most people at least, you either absolutely love or you genuinely hate, and I'm really excited to see where I land on that spectrum. So I think it's about time we take a deep dive into the dreams of everyone's favorite eternal understudy, and see exactly what Dream Team brings to the table. Let's go. And just before we get started, if you like what I do, like the video and subscribe to the channel. If you really want to help out, you can join my Patreon. You'll get these videos a week in advance, and you'll contribute to my current goal. If I hit 50 bucks a month, I'll cover Super Mario RPG. Otherwise, I'm moving on once this series is finished. Anyways, plug over. So the game starts with Peach being delivered an invitation for a vacation to Pillow Island, I'm not saying it that way the whole video, and deciding to, along with some of her important staff, take Mario and Luigi along for some fun relaxation in the sun. The trip is interrupted, however, as a strange, evil-looking pillow falls onto the blimp and unveils itself as this being of darkness that attacks the group. Mario dispatches it pretty quickly, but unfortunately the blimp is damaged and begins to crash. We then cut to Luigi, finally waking up in the hospital, the ordeal having broken his body and crushed his spirit, as his story finally begins. L has come too. Alright, no, that didn't happen. Luigi wakes up at the Pillow Island Blimport, revealing that the attack was just a dream and everyone reached their destination safe and sound. It's at this point that we take control of Mario, leaving Luigi behind, and after just a few dozen hours of tutorials, the game finally ends and the day is saved. And that was Mario and Luigi Dream Team. Honestly, this game is super frustrating to me because it's absolutely jam-packed with so much. Oh, it's just a dream. I don't wear that shirt in my videos. Yeah, so it's not exactly that simple. We will get to the tutorials, believe me, we will, but we're gonna have to put a bit of a pin in that for now. Upon making it to the island's castle, the group is shown a video on the history of the kingdom by Brock Monsieur, giving a bit of backstory to the civilization that existed here before the current group of people, the pillows, their artifacts, and a rumored treasure. Peach is excited to hear about the treasure, and after being forced into exploration via rocket platform, the bros head in after her to get her back and maybe find what secrets this castle may hold. In this hidden area, the bros are tested by some spirits that haunt the area and eventually find the princess, as well as a strange stone pillow that was being guarded for some reason. The group brings it back to the main part of the castle, and Luigi, being completely exhausted from the adventure, takes the pillow and goes for a nap. It's here where the game's most important aspect shows up. A strange bubble appears from Luigi's head, and the princess unfortunately gets caught up in its gravity and is sucked in. Mario jumps in after her and ends up in the dream world, a strange place of dreams. He's then greeted by both a dream version of Brock Monsieur and, more strangely, a dream version of Luigi, who apparently embellishes his own features a bit, which is pretty relatable. This dreamy Luigi joins up with Mario to find Peach. They eventually track her down, and the being that has captured her, the same one from Luigi's dream, attacks. After the fight, the being takes her deeper into the dream than Mario can reach, and with no other options, follows a strange voice's instructions to break a stone within the dream, freeing its inhabitant, this game's primary unique companion, Dreambert. Dreambert is a pillow, and he had been trapped in stone for a very long time. Now that he's free, he immediately rushes off to try to save the rest of his people who were also petrified in stone, and the bros rush off to find him. Once they do, he convinces Mario to help him save all of the pillows, because despite Peach being their top priority, some of the petrified pillows may know where she is. Anyways, Dreambert tells the story of the Dream and Dark Stones, the treasures of the pillow, both of which were capable of granting wishes. The evil Antasma stole the Dark Stone, Stone of Nightmares, and was going to use it for his own benefit. Upon being confronted and cornered by the pillows, Antasma shattered the Dark Stone, its shards spreading across the land, petrifying all the pillows it came in contact with, trapping them in chunks of pure nightmare. After freeing a few more pillows, the group learns that Peach may have been taken down into Dream's Deep, and to search out Alphadream, the eldest pillow, who may have knowledge on how to reach into Dream's Deep. And with that, we have our first main goal, to find Alphadream and gain entrance into Dream's Deep, where Peach may be held. So it's time for the bros to actually get out there and start exploring the island, so I figure this would probably be the best thing to start out with, the worlds and structure. Now, each of these games has been a direct sequel to the last in some way, but Dream Team is the first that, in basically every aspect, feels like a direct continuation from the previous entry, with mostly just changes to the overall flow. Bowser's Inside Story was pretty loosey-goosey, with when you'd swap between the three different gameplay styles being very much at the whims of the story. It was even confident enough in itself that it was willing to take away one style in its entirety for a huge portion of the game. Dream Team, on the other hand, is much more rigid in its overall structure. Now, that's not to say that it's boring or anything like that, or that it doesn't ever do anything interesting, as it does, but once you start to see its general MO, it does start to get a bit predictable, which does end up hurting later on. See, for every area you visit on Pillow Island, there is a dream counterpart, and with basically no exceptions, once you finish exploring a real-world area, you'll then go into that area's dream world and complete that dreamy dungeon. There will occasionally be some small wrinkles to this formula, like at Driftwood Shore, where you'll need to explore some micro-dungeon areas to get items you need to fully explore the main one, but it never really gets any more subversive than that, at least until the final dungeon. And what kind of bums me out about this setup, with going in and out of dreams the way that the game does, is that it kind of makes the whole experience feel a lot less cohesive. Bowser's Inside Story was amazing with this. Things you did in Bowser directly affected what he could do and how he progressed. And on top of that, all you needed to do to take over as Bowser was a single button press. Here though, these two worlds are completely separate, and what you do in one will almost never directly affect what you do in the other in any meaningful way. In fact, I think it only happens once. Sure, you'll often need to free pillows to open up a new path, but I don't really think that counts. This doesn't either, before anyone says anything. For all intents and purposes, no matter where you are, whether it's resting on a nice fluffy bed in a park, or infiltrating Bowser's castle, once Luigi decides to go for a snooze, everything outside the dream just stops. And that's a bit disappointing, since dreams and dream worlds are a treasure trove for cool storytelling and progression ideas. Like, imagine if Mario and Dreambert needed to change Luigi's thoughts towards something to remove a barrier in the dream world, or if seeing something in the dream world inspired a new ability for Luigi in the real world, that sort of thing. That being said, it's not like the structure is terrible or anything, it's perfectly fine, but it is a little uninspired after Bowser's Inside Story. Thankfully, the moment-to-moment gameplay really does a lot to make up for the more standard structure. It's probably the most inventive and complex that we've seen so far, and that makes exploring a ton of fun. Areas all have unique mechanics, like the spring platforms in Mushrise Park or the buildable paths in Somnum Woods, which makes them all stand out pretty well. And while most of these areas are pretty linear and don't directly interconnect with each other, it still never feels like you're locked into a hallway. There are plenty of places to go, loads of directions to wander off in, with loads of optional goodies to find along the way. Among those goodies are attack pieces, and I am very pleased to say that pretty much exactly what I wanted to happen with them came true for this game. Bowser's Inside Story's handling was alright, but it did leave things to be desired, especially considering how underused the entire concept was. Handing out loads of special attacks in full, or shoving multiple attack pieces into a single block, that sort of thing. But Dream Team actually goes all out here. In every main area there are 10 attack pieces, and outside of the first one, which is a big tutorial about them, they're pretty much all actually scattered around, and you have to go and find them. This does make a lot of special moves optional, but just like in Bowser's Inside Story, I wanted to find as many of these as I could, so I went out of my way to find them in every area, making scouring each area much more rewarding than it would have been otherwise. Finding beans is a big part of this too. Beans work the exact same way that they did in the previous game. They're simple stat boosts that you can give to Mario or Luigi for whatever stat they offer, but they're implemented so much better here, since pretty much immediately after the first area, Mushrise Park, you can start finding and using them. Finding beans in Bowser's Inside Story was always a bit of an afterthought, since you'd go through almost half the game before you could even start looking, but because you're able to dig for them so much earlier here, I was always on the lookout for them. It gave me much more reason to fully explore even more hard to reach areas. As for the platforming mechanics themselves, out in the overworld we should pretty much know the drill by now. Moves are still on a cycle, things like jumps, Mario's hammer, and the spin jump are basically the same, and it just feels like Mario and Luigi, which is good. But it's not all the same. The bros do get a few new moves to freshen up the experience, and Alphadream have even reworked a few others, specifically the moves that Mario and Luigi used with their hammers. Previously, how it worked was that Mario would swing his hammer to hit things, Luigi could bonk Mario to squish him down, and at least from Partners in Time on, Luigi would use his hammer to dig the bros into the ground so they could fit under small gaps or dig out beans. Dream Team changes that last one up in a way that actually makes a lot of sense. You can still bonk Mario to make him small, but only on hard ground like stone, wood, or metal. If you whack him on softer surfaces like dirt or sand, he'll be shot underground and can dig around like Luigi used to. I actually think this is a really good change, since it frees up another button for a different move, but doesn't remove anything. This sort of context-based ability changing has been needed in this series since 2003, so I'm super glad that they finally got to it here. That being said, they only did it once, and they definitely could have done it at least once more. See, on top of the spin jump, which lets the bros travel longer distances than they normally could by jumping, they also get a spinning drill move, which lets the bros travel longer distances than they normally could by jumping. Now, it's not the exact same thing. The drill lets them break rocks and travel through gaps in stone, while not carrying them quite as far as the regular spin jump does. I think this is a good way to differentiate them, keeping them both useful in their own own right, while rarely being able to use one to do something that the other is needed for. However, they're both just redundant enough that I feel like they should have been combined into one, just like the hammer skills. Now, bear with me since there's a few reasons I feel this way. One is, yes, that they are too similar to be separated, at least in the context of a game that already combines similar abilities together. But most importantly for me is that combining the two of these spinning abilities together would have given the game the ability to completely remove an entire cycle. This game has a 4-option cycle for its platforming moves, one being for jumps, the second being for hammers, and the third being for the spin jumps. But what about the fourth? Well, the fourth cycle is for a new bounce jump that the bros get, which is a pretty fun ability and is used all the time for minigames and platforming puzzles. It's fantastic, probably my favorite ability that you get out in the real world, but does it really need 2 buttons? It's identical each way. I know I'm sort of making a mountain out of a molehill here, but the previous games, at least since Partners in Time, have had their abilities so well considered and so well organized that Dream Team's setup comes off as kind of messy and unoptimal. And all that needed to happen to completely fix it was combine the spin jump and drill into one context-sensitive move. Then the ball would slide down into the third cycle, the fourth would disappear, and the mere act of platforming with all of these abilities would have been made considerably cleaner, smoother, and nicer to use. And beyond that, they could have simplified things even further and made general movement even better if they actually used all of the buttons they had at their disposal. Yes, despite the fact that the 3DS has just as many face buttons as the DS and that the previous games used all 4, albeit not at once, Dream Team for some reason decides to use only 2 and have the X and Y buttons just mirror A and B. This is a pretty big missed opportunity in my opinion because they could have had all available abilities accessible with a single R press. Here's how. So keep jump on A and B. That never changes, so no matter what abilities you're using, you can always do regular jumps, which would already be a massive improvement to movement. Next, default hammers to X and Y. X is Mario's hammer and Y is Luigi's. They could do something in the UI to point out which is which pretty easily. Next, using my suggestion to make the drill and spin jump one button, all the team would need to do is have the spin and ball appear on X and Y after an R press and boom! You've got a simple, easy to understand set of movement controls that has more functionality than the current setup and completely eliminated ability cycling. That's not to say that Dream Team is at all difficult to maneuver with as it is. At least out in the overworld, it's still better than how Superstar Saga handled things, and this game does have the ability to quickly snap back to jump with the L button. Where things get to be a lot more complicated and a lot less smooth of an experience is when Mario hops into one of Luigi's dreams and explores around the Dream World. Dream World areas are pretty much all entirely dungeons, set up very similarly to the areas within Bowser in Bowser's Inside Story. They're all in 2D, they're all very much more heavily built around platforming, all have a unique gimmick, etc, etc. But that's where the majority of the similarities end. The experience of actually exploring these dungeons is completely different to anything we've seen before because Luigi is a bit of a weirdo. As Mario and Luigi explore through the Dream World, they'll come across these things in the background, what Dreambert calls Luiginary works. Dreamy Luigi can fuse with these things to allow for a bunch of new mechanics. These include Luigi fusing with trees, letting Mario grab onto branches to fling himself around, Luigi turning into fans to create air gusts, and even Luigi messing with gravity or changing the flow of time. Individually, these are all really cool and add a bunch of fun variety to these dungeons. Now, these are all controlled by the touchscreen. While Luigi is sleeping, Starlo, who has joined the trip for some reason, will watch over Luigi, and upon discovering a new Luiginary work, Dreambert will tell her how to use it. Most of the time, this just includes harassing Luigi while he's asleep, wiggling his nose or pulling on his mustache. This is my first major problem with the game, as I'm a lefty and a lot of these abilities need you to use them while moving around. I'm sure it's not too bad for righties since you can still use the circle pad to move Mario about while activating them, but for me, if I needed to activate a Luiginary work, I had to stop moving, take out my stylus, hope Mario was in the right spot, then use it, put my stylus away, and keep playing. It wasn't always horrifically inconvenient, since most of these are in pretty low stakes environments where you just have to use them to get around without any time limit, but there were a few with a time limit, and boy was that not a ton of fun. That being said, despite my crime of being born left-handed, I do think that the Luiginary works are fun mechanics that do bring a lot to the gameplay of the Dreamworld sections. Unfortunately though, I feel like there were some missed opportunities here as well, as none of these individual mechanics are ever mixed and matched. They never build on each other. If you're dealing with one Luiginary work on any one screen, that's the only one you'll have to work with until you head into another. I feel like this is largely because they're used on the touchscreen. If they were tied to buttons like, say, X and Y, it would be pretty easy to use two of them in the same room without any major issues. But since they needed to use the touchscreen as much as possible, as it's a 3DS game, there's only one possible Luiginary work available at any point. It's a shame, since so many of these could have worked together to create really cool challenges and puzzles that go well beyond what they're able to accomplish with just one. Like, imagine having to swap gravity around to reach an area at the end of a bunch of fans pointing in different directions. But because of this, many of the puzzle areas that use one of these Luiginary works tend to just blur together. They very rarely get any more difficult than any other, and very rarely use any of these works in ways that surprised or excited me, especially in the optional pillow levels, which are just one or two screens of the same puzzles I've done before that I just have to do again for some collectible. Some Luiginary works do get used pretty thoroughly though, and the one that gets the most use throughout the entire game is definitely the Luiginary stack, for better or worse. Early on, the team will come across this constellation that once Luigi enters it, starts spitting out dozens upon dozens of Luigis that all work together to create the Luiginary stack. This is basically just a big pillar of Luigis that Mario stands on and can move around with. This Luiginary work was given infinitely more time and effort than any other, and it really shows. The stack gets a bunch of its own abilities like falling slightly, a ground pound, and a charge jump that goes super high into the air and can break blocks. Areas that focus on the stack will often use many of these together to create fun platforming levels that play very differently to what we're used to with Mario and Luigi, and I really appreciated everything it did. Well, at least until it started getting expanded on even more. Yeah, what I've just discussed here is just the first form of the Luiginary stack, and that's not even close to everything it can do. The stack gets a few other formations, each with its own set of abilities and use cases. By switching to a cone, the Luigis can spin around, giving much more horizontal movement, and can be used to turn screws and things like that. This form eventually gets the ability to scatter into a tempest, which can cause some things to float, as well as clear things like snow from the screen that could be blocking a player's view. By switching to a ball, which is given much later in the game, the bros can roll about, which is a ton of fun. It can be used to grapple to some specific points, and Mario can even swing it around like a mace, smashing weak structures and even throwing it if he wants to. So this Luiginary work can ground pound, shrink to fit in small areas, charge jump, spin jump, turn bolts, clear obstructions, levitate objects, roll at high speeds, break objects, and is a grappling hook. There's just way too much going on here, and especially due to the fact that these abilities are all on a similar 4-stage cycle, including one stage exclusively to remove the stack, you should be able to start seeing where things go a bit of awry here. Not only is it so much harder to keep track of everything you can do at any given point with this thing, the game is simply unable to make proper use of everything that the stack can do. Even the base stack gets left behind, as later in the game, the cone takes over as the primary platforming ability. Beyond that, remember the Tempest move that lets you carry around objects and stuff? It only gets used for that like twice ever. Same with the screen clearing function, only twice ever. The ball is even more neglected. You know how I said Mario can throw it? Well, I literally only ever did that in the tutorial where I was forced to. It is never necessary outside of that. It just makes me think that the designers for this game were trying to put as much stuff in it as possible, fill it to the brim with mechanics without ever really thinking about what it did for the playability of the game as a whole, and whether or not the mechanics actually did anything to improve the experience. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff you can do, but more is certainly not always better, and with the Luiginary stack, as well as all of the other unique Luiginary works that are littered throughout the Dream World, it ends up feeling so incredibly incredibly bloated. Yes, Bowser's Inside Story was constantly introducing new things, new ideas, and new mechanics, but once it did what it wanted, it moved on, keeping the experience manageable. Dream Team never moves on from anything that they introduce in the Dream World. It just keeps piling on more and more, never exploring anything properly, just spreading itself thinner and thinner while making the experience of playing the game more and more overwhelming. If they trimmed the fat here, removed abilities that didn't do much, and focused on getting the absolute most out of what they implemented, it would have been a lot more consistently fun to explore the Dream World. You know what else could have made the game a whole lot more fun by trimming them out? The tutorials. Yeah, I'm pretty sure everyone knew this was coming. I had heard that the tutorials in Dream Team were particularly bad, but I honestly wasn't sure if I believed it. But oh boy, the rumors were true, and it made a huge impact on the amount of fun I had with the game. This game does not trust the player to do anything on their own. Take the Luiginary Works for example. When first playing the game and going through the tutorial for the first one, I thought it was fine. They explained that upon seeing a new Luiginary work, Luigi can enter it, and you get a new ability that you use the touchscreen to activate. That's perfectly fine. If they kinda just left it at that and maybe gave a tiny bit of instruction on the bottom screen for each subsequent one, so you knew what to do with them, then that would have worked really great. But no, for pretty much all of them, you get a new full tutorial that explains how to use each one, including a conversation between Dreambird and Starlo about it. I say most because there are actually two that let go of the reins and let the player play the game. One, the literal last one you get in the final dungeon, only has Dreambird tell you that you've got a new ability and offers to help if you need it. That's honestly what should have happened for all of them, but I digress. The other one that doesn't have a tutorial is the one that changes gravity. I guarantee this was a mistake. It's smack dab in the middle of the game, well before they're through giving out tutorials for every new thing every few minutes, and they still tutorialize much simpler abilities later on, which to me at least implies that the lack of tutorial here wasn't in fact due to the developers thinking you're smart enough to learn how to rotate a circle, but rather that they just forgot to add it in. And it's not just the Luiginary Works that are overly tutorialized. Pretty much everything that you do in this game is given a long tutorial, some even multiple times. Yeah, early on, right after you get badges, an unskippable tutorial happens explaining how they work. You know what? That's fine. It's early in the game, badges can be pretty complicated, so having a tutorial for them makes perfect sense. I would have preferred if it was skippable, but you win some, you lose some. A couple hours later, you get prompted with a badge tutorial again. At least this one is skippable, but why even have it? The tutorial for badges already happened, but it gets worse. If you happen to walk into the badge shop in Wakeport for any reason, you get pelted with another unskippable tutorial about badges. 3 tutorials for badges that all tell you the same general things, 2 of them being unskippable if you happen to be unlucky enough to trigger them. It's frankly insulting how little faith Alphadream has in its audience to be able to learn things at all. Teaching is fine, teaching is good, but as a developer you have to let go of the bike at some point. You don't have to go back to the 80s where the tutorial was losing all of your lives trying to figure out what button did what. But when you're 25 hours into a 35-hour game, and it's still tossing tutorials at you for things the player should probably be able to easily recognize and learn, there's probably something very wrong. The developers clearly don't trust the player to be able to intuit what mechanics do or how to use them. I could rant for a while more about this, but I think you all get the point. These tutorials suck. Being constantly roadblocked to be taught things you already know is infuriating, especially since the vast majority of them are completely unskippable. So, if any of you decided to maybe play the game again one day, you have no choice but to suffer. The battles aren't spared any of this either, but thankfully most of the battle tutorials are at least skippable. And on that note, I think it's about time we start talking about the battles, since there's also a lot here to talk about. There are just as many battle systems as there were in Bowser's Inside Story, each with their own sets of, let's say, quirks that deserve their own discussion. So, battling with the bros is pretty much what you'd expect at this point. Mario and Luigi line up against a group of foes and they have to use hammers or jumps to defeat them. The core idea is basically identical here to every other game, and it's really just everything that surrounds the battle system that has seen significant change. For instance, equipment has been changed and is a lot more in line with more traditional RPGs now. Instead of having several equipment slots for different things, there's now a hammer slot, a boot slot, and a gear slot. As As you travel, you'll find a bunch of different types of gear, which will often just be better versions of what you already have, so you'll need to constantly keep track of what equipment you have and what you're using to make sure you're always getting the most out of your stats, at least with the hammers and boots. Other gear is kind of a grab bag of everything else you'd expect. There's clothes that boost your defenses, along with other types of accessories and stuff that'll give you more unique effects while leaving defenses low. The badge system has been carried over from the previous game with a few tweaks, and I'm super happy about that. They pretty much did exactly what I was hoping to do with it as well. They took the system and expanded on it, giving lots of new options that didn't exist before. The game touts 36 different combinations, but that's not exactly true. There are more effects, but it's just like Bowser's Inside Story, some badge combinations just end up being this combination but better. The new effects they added are really cool and fun to use though. I'm a big fan of the Master plus Guard combo that blocks damage from 6 hits, and the Gold plus Miracle combo that temporarily stops time to prevent enemies from moving. In battle, the badges are a bit different as well, for the better. In Bowser's Inside Story, you had one charge that you could store forever, and as soon as you used it, you'd drop back down to square one and have to charge it up again. In Dream Team, you actually get a badge stock, which lets you charge more badges than just one that you can use whenever you want. If you like one type of badge, you can save up multiple charges and use them whenever the need arises, and if you like multiple badges, you can charge one up, swap your loadout, and then charge a different one, storing both effects. I absolutely love this. It took an already good system and gave it so much more versatility than it ever had before. What's even better is that if you like using badges a lot, you can actually increase the amount of badge slots you have, which brings me directly to how this game handles leveling up and ranking up. So let's start with the good. Ranking up in Bowser's Inside Story was fine, but its main actual benefit was increasing the amount of gear you could wear. That was good, and it did give a big boost to your overall viability, but Dream Team does something so much more interesting with it. See, in Dream Team, when you rank up, you get a set of upgrades and you get to choose which one you want to have. You want to use more badges? Then upgrade the badge stock. You want to level up quicker or take less damage? Well, then choose those upgrades. This is so cool because it's not like some upgrade systems where you're guaranteed to get all of them by the end of the game. There's only 5 total ranks, so of the 14 different bonus options, you'll never be able to get them all, and the bonus only applies to the brother that chooses it. This is super good for replayability if you wanted to try out different types of builds. Now, I went for a very specific set of bonuses, but I'll get into those in a little bit. As for regular leveling up, it's also pretty similar to how it was before, but it's even easier to get the maximum stat boosts. There's multiple of each number in a row now, and the cycle always restarts when you exit out of the bonus. On top of that, the biggest number will show up about half a second after that starting point, so just do that on whatever stat you want and you'll get the best bonus. And hey, Bros points are back. On that note, Bros moves have also seen some noticeable changes from how they were done before. They're very similar to Bowser's Inside Story in that they're mostly interesting, unique moves that look great and are fun to pull off. Mario and Luigi each get separate moves now though, similar to how things were handled in Superstar Saga, and I really like that. Partners in Time and Bowser's Inside Story didn't really see a lot of variety in move use for me, because once I found one that was really good, like the Copy Flower or Magic Window, I'd just use that every time. But splitting them up means that I can't just autopilot them. I have to find moves that I like and ones that'll work in any situation. Mario and Luigi both have good moves that'll hit single targets and multiple, so because of that, I ended up using a much wider variety of moves depending on the situation. Good stuff. And now we need to talk about some things I'm not as much of a fan of here. And to do that, we're gonna slow things down, get real leisurely, because if there's one word I can use to describe this game's battle system, it's molasses. Sorta sweet, but very slow. Starting with the action commands, both jump and hammer have been redone, and while conceptually they are the same, they both take way longer to do, and I have no idea why. The commands felt great in Bowser's Inside Story and are probably the best in the series, so I don't really see how slowing them down would make them any better. This probably seems like a small issue, but even if it's like 2 seconds more per command, when you're doing them hundreds upon hundreds of times throughout the game, it will add up. I suppose if the impact was significantly weightier and they did way more damage, I could see it as a way to make the battles feel more intense, but that's about as far from the case as possible, and here's where my rank choices come back. My rank choices, for Mario at least, who is the most important character in this game, was Quick Level for faster experience gain, BP Up Plus for more Bros Points gain, Power Up Plus for more damage, and Casual Bros, which cuts Bros Point requirements for moves in half. I did things this way because after my first playthrough, I realized that if you were ever using your regular attacks, you were literally just wasting your time. With how slow attacks are and how weak they are, I was less incentivized to fight regular battles, and considering the level curve has been decimated compared to Bowser's Inside Story as well, even winning fights wasn't very rewarding, especially if they lasted several turns. So I went all in on Bros moves. I'd hyper focus on power and BP, spend all of my money on syrup, and only ever use a regular attack if it was absolutely necessary. After doing this, especially in my second playthrough, battles were quick, engaging, and rewarding because I was able to progress through the game in the way it wanted me to, still never getting even close to the final rank by the way, while doing everything that I enjoyed and bypassing everything that made the system boring. Every one of these issues is so much worse in the Dream World. So rather than Mario and Luigi facing off against a small set of foes, things are set up differently here. It's just Mario now. Dreamy Luigi basically acts like Mario's stand and can't really be controlled separately. And rather than a small set of enemies that can be taken out before the sun explodes, Mario will almost always face off against a huge group of enemies, easily 15 plus in basically every standard bout. Now, if Mario just had his regular jumps and hammers, this would be basically impossible, but Luigi does help out while attacking. When jumping, after doing regular Mario things, Luigi's will fall from the sky doing chip damage to enemies surrounding the one Mario targeted. And when using hammers, Mario summons a group of Luigi's to blast every enemy on the field with a hammer hit. These are both fine in concept, but especially as you get further into the game, it becomes more and more obvious that a turn using either Mario's hammer or jumps in the Dream World is even less useful than in the real world. Battles take so long to finish this way, since despite hitting multiple enemies, neither the hammer or jump hit any for full damage, leading to situations where you'll end up wasting multiple turns to finish off a few stragglers that were left behind by attacks that didn't RNG enough damage. But that wouldn't even be that big of a deal if it weren't for how enemy attacks work in the Dream World. See, out in the Overworld, things were pretty much what we're used to. When enemies attack, they do their thing, targeting whatever bro they want, and you'd have to either dodge with jumps or counter with hammers. No big differences there, it's a system that's worked perfectly for a decade so far. But in the Dream World, Alphadream has decided that pretty much every single attack from every single enemy in every single battle is a mini game. Some of these are pretty quick, 10 to 15 seconds, especially early on when there aren't as many enemies in battle. But this, again, gets exponentially worse later on when there are more enemies on screen and the attack minigames become longer. I've had single, regular enemy encounters that have lasted longer than major bosses did in other games because regular attacks can't clear out anything, and every turn that you let enemies live, you get to withstand another 20 plus second minigame, or even longer since some enemies can just do them multiple times. They drag out every battle so long and end up being so boring that I just couldn't stand them. And I guess this does track in a game that's about a guy who's drowsy all the time. This battle system is absolutely lethargic. And that's where the special moves in the Dream World come in. You can't use Bros attacks in the Dream World as Mario doesn't have a proper brother in there with him. But what you can learn are Luiginary attacks, which are special moves that Mario can use, which utilize his gaggle of Luigis for various different effects. A lot of these are really fun. I particularly liked the Luiginary Ball, Luiginary Stack, and Luiginary Wall moves. But more than fun, they were completely necessary, since a well done ball or wall on a group of enemies could be almost guaranteed to wipe them all out in a single attack. So that's what I'd do. I'd enter a battle, use the proper Luiginary attack, and wipe everything out in one turn. Now, since my stats were so focused on doing as much damage as possible, Mario was slow enough that enemies would typically get one attack on him beforehand, but only one. That way I did still experience most of what the battle system had to offer, but in a fraction of the time the game wanted wanted me to spend. Now I know it seems like I'm saying that I only really started to enjoy this game's battles after I learned how to end them all in one turn. It really sucks that I felt like I needed to do this because at least conceptually, I really do love a lot of the things that the game brings to the table during these Dream World battles. First is that it introduces two new types of defensive options for Mario. One, rather than just staying put and letting enemies attack, some Dream attacks let Mario move around and choose which enemies he's going to try to counter. And two, rather than just having enemies come from directly in front or behind, some attacks will surround Mario and he'll have to defend himself from all sides. This one in particular is a brilliant addition that I'm genuinely surprised hadn't shown up yet, and I really hope it returns in Paper Jam as well, since it's a perfect addition to the system, and I feel it could even work with multiple characters. Second is that some enemies will have different formations, and will change those formations based on which ones are still around. Take the Dream Cap enemies. They'll fearlessly charge at Mario, but only if their leaders are in the battle. Take those guys out, and the rabble will just cower waiting for Mario to finish them off. These are both fantastic additions to the battle system that I would have loved to engage with if it weren't for the fact that simply not eliminating everything immediately was such a massive time sink, forcing me into minigames that are really not that fun over and over and over and over. And on the bright side, most of the issues I have only pop up in regular battles. I typically found bosses to be engaging, well designed, and really creative. While some of their attacks do go on way too long for my liking, especially the ones that have the brothers chased by the boss from the top screen, it's not something that really bothered me too much here, as bosses are supposed to be more difficult and more of a commitment to defeat. So yeah, my thoughts on these first two battle systems are complicated. There are a ton of cool ideas here, but man, the amount of time the game expects from you just to fight these battles is way beyond reasonable. It's really creative and well thought out overall. I just wish there was a way to increase the speed to 2 times. That would have done a ton for the overall flow and pacing of the game. I really don't talk about this sort of thing too often, but my first playthrough ended after about 35 hours doing like half of the optional content, where I spent the majority of the game not abusing Bros moves, treating them the same as I did in previous games, useful tools for special scenarios. My second, doing basically everything, including freeing all of the pillows for the final Bros move, took 23. While yes, every game I've played through twice has been a bit faster the second time around, I did more stuff in my second playthrough, and I never really got lost in the first either, considering how linear the game actually is. Just using special moves for basically every battle removed an entire Partners in Time's worth of playtime. That is absurd. And yeah, there is one more battle system to go over, and it's basically the same as Bowser's giant battles, except slower. Occasionally, Mario and Dreamy Luigi will come across an enemy that is monstrous, and there's seemingly no hope. But after Starlo reminds us to press on Luigi's cap every time it happens, Luigi's will gather and will combine into a massive L plus Mario. Just like in the previous game, at this point the screens will rotate and we will enter a giant Luigi battle. And like I said, these are pretty much the same as the giant Bowser fights. Very simple mechanically, just basic attacking and dodging for the most part, with very little variety in what you actually do, although they do try to do a bit more with them than in Bowser's Inside Story, so I do appreciate that. Now, up to this point, everything in the series had been 2D sprites, but in order to fully realize the vision for the giant battles, they needed to be in 3D, so Alphadream, who aren't any good at 3D games, needed help. They enlisted the help of fellow Nintendo partner Goodfeel, who are best known for Kirby's Epic Yarn and Yoshi's Woolly World, to handle the development of the giant battles for them. They definitely feel like a different experience, unlike Bowser's giant battles, which fit right into Bowser's Inside Story, but I do feel like this was for the best. Goodfeel really tried to make these super climactic, and they absolutely are. The huge hits, sprawling areas, and sweeping camera moves all do a great job of selling the size of everything here. If the battles are going to be slow, they need to feel massive, and Goodfeel pulled it off beautifully. I do kind of wish they were a bit more creative with them mechanically though. They're all very simple from the first to the last, and they even straight up copied one of the giant fights from the previous game, which is very disappointing. One of these fights in particular does deserve a spotlight, spotlight, but that'll have to wait until later on. So yeah, while I do feel like they could have done more with these to make them stand out from a mechanical standpoint, they are still pretty fun most of the time, and of course the team put a ton of work into making them look amazing, which brings me to the overall presentation. Visually, I think it looks really good. The sprites are another generational leap up from the DS, are super detailed, very well shaded, and really fit well in with the world, which is now mostly made out of 3D models. And of course, the extra hardware really let the team go even further with animations, which are now even smoother and more ambitious than ever before. Other characters beyond the bros all look super good as well and are all given just as much love. However, this game did come with a distinct art style change, one that I don't 100% mesh with. I think a lot of it comes down to the removal of the black outline that the sprites used to have. The outline really made them pop out of the screen, and removing it really makes the silhouettes a lot less distinctive and overall makes the sprites less eye-catching than before. That being said, I think this was done on purpose because of what system this game is on, 3DS. Because this game is on 3DS and it does make use of the 3D effect, Alphadream did everything they could to make sprites that would be able to be properly represented using that 3D, and have the sprites truly feel like they were in that three-dimensional world. Having thick black outlines on the sprites would really only cement their lack of a third dimension, so I completely understand why they'd remove it. I personally didn't use the 3D effect though, so I'm kinda just going off what their team said in the Iwata Asks interview. It's not that I don't like the 3DS 3D effect, I used it plenty when I was younger, but I'm getting a little bit older now, have developed a bit of astigmatism, so this type of 3D just turns everything into a blurry mess, so I left it off, and thus can't really judge how good their implementation of the 3D is. But yeah, I feel like the sprite work here is really good, albeit not my favorite in the series. It's got its ups for sure, but it also has its issues. I feel like Bowser definitely got downgraded. He, more than most characters in this series, benefits from the more overtly cartoony style that Bowser's Inside Story went with, and this more detailed version just feels a little bit off. Still far from the worst looking Bowser in the series though. As for the environments, they all look really good as well. The 3DS was the ideal system to swap to 3D environments, and the overworld does look really good. Everything's nice and crisp, the textures are nice to look at, and yeah, nothing really to complain about at all, aside from some small performance issues here and there. The dream world is all sprites though, and I think this was a great decision. They went all out with the environmental design in the dream world. It's all very surreal and really sells the idea of being in a dream. From dreamy dozing sands, impossible railways and drilling machinery, to dreamy Somnum Woods as well, everything, it really feels like this is a world made from Luigi's dreams, being slightly absurd but pulling from his real experiences and emotions. It's great. As for the sound, Yoko Shimomura kills it once again with another amazing soundtrack overall. While I do feel like there's probably more misses than in her previous outing, I'm not really a fan of the regular battle theme. There's just as many tracks that are as good, if not better, than what she did in the previous games. Area tracks like Lofty Mount Pajamaha, do an amazing job of setting tone and atmosphere for the areas you're exploring. And just like Bowser's Inside Story, tracks do have separate alternate versions for songs while inside the dream world, like with Sunny Driftwood Shore, and they're all just great as well. Battle tracks are also mostly great, with songs like Never Let Up, and this game's final battle track, Adventure's End, being just as astounding as in the final, in my opinion. Now, interestingly, this game doesn't really carry on with Bowser's Inside Story's style of cutscene presentation. It pretty much never uses the second screen for anything that isn't directly related to gameplay. That being said, it's not a negative per se. Bowser's Inside Story was particularly well suited to making more thorough use of the two screens. And what few things we do get, like Luigi's general reactions to things while sleeping, are super charming. I kinda wish they were able to do a bit more with it though. And on that note, let's start heading back towards the story. Now, like last time, I want to focus on the characters and writing first because I think that's a lot more interesting than the actual plot. I honestly think that this game may very well have the best comedic writing in the series, and it's almost entirely thanks to the game's cast of characters, which are pretty much all hilarious except for maybe Starlo, who has kind of lost most of the charm she had in Inside Story. Speaking of Starlo, why is she even here? I know she helped out with the adventure in the previous game, but she was on a mission there, so it made sense for her to stick around to try to see things through. But she's kind of just here, and the game tries to force a reason for her to be here, but it definitely doesn't work. Anyways, she's just here to abuse Luigi for the whole game, a gag that is definitely not played out at all by this point. She is definitely the lowest point of the game's characters. I pretty much like everyone else that the bros come across. From the various Brock people, including Brock Monsieur, to the bodybuilding duo of Big Massive and Lil Massive, to Bowser's crew from the previous game, Private Goomp, Sergeant Guy, and Corporal Paraplonk, who I was really happy to see return. Speaking of that, Dream Team actually has a bunch of characters from previous games making appearances here. Kylie Koopa from Partners in Time is back, which is nice to see, and also super weird since they kind of just have to ignore the fact that the adult Mario Bros met her like 30 years ago in universe. She doesn't have a major role, she just serves as a minigame NPC, but it's nice to see her back. Also, Popple from Superstar Saga returns, and he's probably my least favorite addition overall. I mean, it's nice to see him, I suppose, but despite showing up several times throughout the story, he's basically completely irrelevant and only exists to maybe make one boss fight a bit harder. Also, his personality seems to have completely changed, going from general sneakiness in Superstar Saga to Brooklyn mobster here, which I'm not a huge fan of. And there is one more important character, Dreambert, or Prince Dreambert. He's the prince of the old Pillow Kingdom, and he does try to present himself in a very royal manner. He's typically polite, task-driven, and tries to be helpful, but is prone to flying off the handle when he's not treated with the proper respect. This is the sort of character that, if not handled properly, could very well easily act as a wet blanket, who constantly puts a damper on all the fun that any scenario would try to have. But thankfully, that never actually happens with Dreambert. He's a serious guy, yeah, but he still ends up as the butt of enough jokes that he still ends up being endearing and fun, and is a great addition to the main cast. Despite my few misgivings with a few of these characters, the writing is overall still fantastic. The game is absolutely hilarious whenever it's trying to be funny, which is most of the time. It's got some amazing sight gags, plenty of funny slapstick, and some jokes that are a little bit very creepy if you think about them for just a bit too long. So yeah, it's great. And now we're gonna head back towards the plot. So there are some pretty important gameplay things to talk about here as well, but this is your point to skip if you want to skip. There's gonna be a timestamp somewhere here, so anyways, let's go. Where we left off, Mario, Luigi, Dreambert, and Starlo were off to find where Alphadream is, since he's the only chance they have to possibly enter Dream's Deep. They eventually find his pillow being held by Brickle, and upon freeing him, he opens up a path down into Dream's Deep. This is an incredible area. Visually, it's super striking, but I like it because they do their best to try to represent Luigi's deep subconscious. There's loads of text floating around with the Luigi silhouettes saying things like, "Let me help," "I can jump high," or "Take me with you." It does a really good job of portraying Luigi's feelings towards his brother, how he's usually left behind for most of these adventures, without being overly dramatic about it. Eventually, far within Dream's Deep, Mario finds Peach, who's being held by Antasma. Bowser then shows up, who's here because why not, I guess, and Antasma actually convinces Bowser to join forces to take out the bros. Mario actually loses here, and Bowser and Antasma leave since they've got much bigger plans than simple princess napping. Dreambert immediately realizes the danger the island is under, and Alphadream knows what Antasma must be going after. He's going to try to get the Dreamstone, the remaining treasure of the pillows, which he can then use to grant himself wishes to take over the world. So it's up to the bros to find it first, and prevent Antasma from using it. They learn that the Dreamstone is at the top of Mount Pajamaha and make the climb to find it, but of course they're too late. Bowser and Antasma have found the Dreamstone and are going to use the Dream Beats to put everyone on the island to sleep so they can charge up the Dreamstone's power. I thought this was going to be a major plot point, like for the next few hours everyone on the island would be asleep and it'd be up to the bros to find a way to reverse the Dream Beats or something like that, since it shows people across the island falling asleep. But nope. Yeah, the Dream Portal in Dreamy Mountain Pajamaha disappears, forcing Mario to do the dungeon, but it has no effect on anything beyond that. Everyone is just totally fine afterwards and it's never really brought up again. This whole section feels completely pointless, and all they really needed to do to give it some purpose would be to put the source of the Dream Beats in the Dream World for the bros to destroy, freeing everyone from their slumber instead of just having Luigi be too sleepy. And this is not the best time for Luigi to be napping, since with the Dreamstone powered up, Bowser and Antasma are basically free to do whatever they want in preparation for taking over the world. So they start with a little real estate. So yeah, while Luigi is sleeping like some kind of loser, Bowser and Antasma make themselves a new castle. Oh, and we also get our fast travel at this point too, 10 to 15 hours into the game. Thanks. Anyways, once this is done, everybody realizes that the island is probably a bit too dangerous for Peach to be wandering around in, since she has a history of disappearing, so a decision is made to hide her in the Dream World, away from Bowser and Antasma's grasp somehow. They find a nice place for her to rest up in, but it turns out that Peach has already been kidnapped by Bowser, and this whole thing was just a trap to take out Mario. Kamek, who's rocking that dress by the way, orders the goons to attack, and after a pretty easy fight, they retreat. But now that Peach is gone, in the hands of Bowser and Antasma, the team needs to rethink their strategy and start going on the offensive. After consulting with Dr. Snoozemore, who's finally actually here, they decide on a plan to enlist the help of the Z-Keeper, who is certainly powerful enough to break through Antasma's barrier to allow entry into Neo Bowser Castle. But this is Dream Team, so it's definitely not so simple as just going to a place and finding the Z-Keeper. Oh no, we've got a lengthy fetch quest to complete. The Z-Keeper's dream is only accessible from a very specific place, and not only that, you need to be using a very specific bed, the Ulti-Bed. It's split up into 5 different parts throughout the world, so after a scavenger hunt, including an introduction to this game's challenge area, good job integrating it into the main game. Seriously, I love it when these sorts of things are actually introduced during the critical path. The Ulti-Bed is made, and it's time to go find the Z-Keeper. They eventually track it down, this giant rainbow-colored bird, who isn't really looking to have company and attacks. And this fight, the second to last giant fight, is where I need to bring something else gameplay related up. See, Dream Team occasionally uses motion controls in these battles. Motion controls are not inherently an issue to me, I like them when they're done well, but this is not a system where they're really done well too often. This is no exception. In the past, you've needed to tilt the 3DS around to do some finishing attacks on giant bosses, which never really worked for me on console, but honestly, it's not that big of a deal. It's a big deal in this fight though. As you fight the Z-Keeper, he does this move where for a few minutes, he'll drag you into a portal and you'll need to tilt the 3DS screen around to dodge his attacks. Now, Alphadream realized that tilting the screen all over the place in the middle of a boss fight is a bad idea when the thing you're tilting around is the screen, so they made it so the motions you need to do are absolutely minuscule. So small that it's incredibly easy to overshoot and not be able to recenter since there's no recenter button, basically causing the entire phase and likely the fight to be a wash, as you'll never be able to dodge any of his attacks and just get obliterated. Now, I did get through it on my 4th attempt or something like that, but this is just another boss that upon failing it really doesn't feel like it's my fault. The game is using hardware features in a way that doesn't take into account any possible failings of those features and punishing the player for not having as much knowledge of the 3DS hardware as developers do. This is not the last time this is an issue, but it is the instance that gave me the most trouble, so I figured I'd bring it up. That being said, aside from that one attack, the Z-Keeper fight is probably the best of the giant fights. His attacks are fun to deal with, he's got some interesting unique traits, and the area you fight him in is gorgeous. If they were all this creative and fun, I'd probably like the giant fights a whole lot more. It's just a shame that they forced the use of tilt controls here. After the fight, the Z-Keeper acknowledges our strength and agrees to talk to us. He's a pretty imposing figure, at least until Dreambird shows up. He then immediately drops the facade to reveal that he's a total dude bro, which is hilarious. So the bros plead their case with old Zeke, but he still refuses to help, at least until Dreambird promises to give him all of Mario's money as payment, a plan that Mario is definitely completely on board with. With the deal done, the Z-Keeper destroys the barrier to Neo Bowser Castle, and all that's left is to head in there and beat up some bad guys. After some Kamek related shenanigans and a pretty fun dungeon that actually has you go in and out of dreams to directly open the path forwards, the team finds where Bowser and Phantasma are hiding, and as it turns out, they're within Bowser's dreams. So they head in there to confront them. I love this area as well. It's a dark, evil looking place with floating Bowser heads laughing at the bros all over the place. It's such a cool looking place. They eventually find Bowser, who thinks he's got the upper hand in his dreams and powers up. He then SDs off ledge and it's time to move on. Obviously though, he had another stock and we get our final giant fight against Bowser. This one is fine. I overall think it's not quite as good as the Z-Keeper fight, which was great outside of that one move, but yeah, it's fine. At the end, you need to do this super finishing move where you need to tilt the 3DS quickly and precisely to do so, or you instantly fail it. That was very frustrating, but I got through it, and with that done, we're in the final stretch, just Phantasma and real world Bowser left. Phantasma's fight is pretty great. He can drag you deeper into dream worlds, he can abduct your Luigi, and his moves are just generally fun to go against. It's not a particularly hard fight, especially with Dreambird here to heal you each turn, but it is a ton of fun. With him down, all that's left is the final showdown against Bowser, who has the Dream Stone, versus Mario and Luigi. Before Bowser is able to use the stone, Peach and Starlo use beam magic that I guess they have to destroy it, but Bowser, who got a vacuum ability in the last game, uses that to suck up all the shards of the broken stone, which transforms him into Dreamy Bowser. Now, I kinda hate this fight. I feel like this is probably a bit of an unpopular opinion, so I guess I'm gonna have to explain myself on this one. Alright, so what needs to be done here is just dealing damage to Bowser's head, but that's impossible until you deal enough damage to his arms, which are blocking it. Honestly, a pretty simple method of defeating a boss, at least compared to what we're used to in this series. That is totally fine, it's easy enough to damage Bowser's arms, and once you do, hitting the head is relatively simple as well. I also don't really have a problem with any of Bowser's attacking moves. They're all pretty fun to deal with, varied, and interesting. My problem comes from one thing he can do. See, at any point in the fight, and as many times as he wants to, he can jump into the background of the fight, summon a ton of enemies, and start healing himself. Every time he does this, he'll heal for 150 HP, and his arms will heal up 200 every turn until you eliminate all of the enemies and bring him back into the foreground. Now there's a couple ways to do this. You can try to defeat all of the enemies normally with moves and stuff, but chances are that won't work right away, giving Bowser even more time to heal up. What you're supposed to do is use this taunt ball item to goad Bowser into attacking his own allies, removing them from the field quicker. Before this fight, I had used the taunt balls a grand total of 0 times, so I had no idea what they even did. Now, I guess you could say that's on me for not experimenting with them before this point, and that's fair, I didn't. But for all of the things they tutorialize in this game, they don't even bother to implement a mechanic used in the final boss at all in any other mandatory fight. It just needed to happen once in some other boss fight, and bam! The idea of using taunt balls would be firmly in my brain, but since it had literally never been necessary before, I never thought to use it in my first playthrough. Because of this, Bowser's heal move was catastrophic and basically forced resets. I actually don't mind final bosses having heal moves. This move would have been perfectly fine, even healing on multiple turns if it was limited in some way. Bowser in Paper Mario 64 can only ever heal twice, for instance. If that were the case here, then I wouldn't really have a problem with it, but Bowser can pull this move out whenever he wants with no cooldown at any opportunity. If he decides to heal the very next turn after coming back into the foreground, well then tough cookies. Hope you didn't want to make any progress in the fight. If this was somehow limited, the fight could have been so much more interesting and so much more fun, since even if his HP was significantly higher and his moves more dangerous, the players would, at the very least, be constantly making progress. As it is, you just have to hope to undo his stalling tactics long enough that the next time he goes for it, his HP is lower than it was when you started. But eventually, once you learn how to use the taunt balls and get some good attack RNG, he will go down, and with his dreamy power gone, Mario and Luigi give him a good few whacks and send him off into the sky, Team Rocket style. From there, it's just a quick escape scene and that's it. The day is saved and the island is free from Phantasma's evil, and things can start to go back to normal. Well, as normal as an island can be, with an ancient civilization having awoken and kind of wanting to hang around at least. And while the Dreamstone was destroyed, Zeke actually has the ability to recreate it, and does so in a manner that is most befitting of him. He creates a giant coin. But he does give some good advice to not rely on things and instead rely on each other for comfort and safety. He's a good dude, that Zeke. But he's not quite done, and as one final gift, he creates New Super Mario Bros. 2. Thanks, I guess. And that was Mario and Luigi Dream Team. So yeah, this game is weird. It kind of feels like it has youngest child syndrome, you know what I mean? Big Brother Bowser's Inside Story was such a huge success, so Dream Team had to try to be even bigger and even better. Unfortunately for the game though, I feel like it ended up trying to do way too many things, not exploring its best ideas fully, and coming across as feeling unfocused as a result. There's some amazing things here. The overworld exploration and level design is probably the most varied and most interesting we've seen so far, and some of the changes that systems introduced in the previous game got are one-to-one exactly what I hoped would have happened, like trusting people to actually explore and find attack pieces. But trust is one of this game's biggest flaws. No matter how far you are into the game, no matter what you've already learned, the game will never trust you to be able to do anything on your own. Despite my other issues with the game, its shotgun approach to mechanics, its more linear, less surprising structure, and its absolutely mind-numbingly slow pace thanks to how the battle system is designed, the fact that the game doesn't trust me enough to play it, doesn't think I'm smart enough to figure out even the most basic of ideas, is really what brings the whole experience down for me. I've said this before and I'll say it again. Yes, I'm aware that this game was primarily designed for kids, not 30-somethings who have decades of experience playing games, but I simply don't accept that as a reason for this style of approach. This game was made for kids, so was this one too. No one benefits from having their hand held the entire experience. It's a clear sign of a lack of confidence from the developers, and more importantly, it's just not fun. I really don't like ending these videos on a sour note, but I don't really see how I can have any other conclusion than this. I genuinely wanted to love this game, especially considering how much I've grown to love the rest of this series. There is a ton to love here. Heck, I did really enjoy my second playthrough, but I don't think this is a situation where I can just ignore all of its problems. They're just too fundamental and too widespread to look past, and that's a shame. In another universe where the pacing was better and the developers respected the intelligence of their players, I could easily see this being equal to, if not better than Bowser's Inside Story, but as it is, it's probably my least favorite game in the series. At least so far, as next we have the final game in the series up to this point, a game I have a serious bone to pick with, Mario and Luigi Paper Jam. Thank you all so much for watching. And before we finish off, I want to thank my amazing patrons, R.A. Miller, Anon42, Kevin Dion, and Lewis Golden. You're the best. Thank you so much.